There wasn't a knock. That's the part I still don't get. It was early spring in Denver, one of those evenings where the snow hangs on in the shade, but the air smells like it wants to change. I'm Caleb. I'm 31, and I was stepping out with a small trash bag, half asleep from a long shift, thinking about absolutely nothing. Then I saw him. A tiny kitten sat right between two welcome mats, mine and the one across the hall. He wasn't crying out, not begging, just sitting like he had an appointment here. Like this spot between our doors was his address. He had that pale body and a darker little face, ears, tail, like someone had dipped him in gray-blue paint at the ends. Blue Point, I thought, and immediately wondered how a kitten that looked that specific ended up in an apartment hallway. There were wet specks on the tile, little melted snow dots leading to him. He blinked slow, but he didn't relax. His whole body stayed gathered, ready to vanish if I moved wrong. My neighbor's door cracked open. I'd seen her in passing, polite nods, nothing more. Tonight, her eyes landed on the kitten first, then on me, like I'd placed him there. At the exact same time, we both, is that yours? We both knew how ridiculous it sounded the second it left our mouths. The kitten stood up, took 3 careful steps to my mat, and rubbed his cheek against the edge like he was testing if the smell meant something. Then he turned and did the same to her mat. Slow, exact, like he was checking 2 options. Then he sat down again, right in the middle, perfectly centered, waiting. My neighbor whispered, "We should call the building manager in the morning." I shook my head before I even thought about it. "He can't stay out here tonight." The kitten's ears flicked at my voice. He looked past us into the dim end of the hallway where the overhead light didn't quite reach, and then, without a sound, he stepped out of the bright square on the floor and melted into the darker corridor like he'd never been there. I followed before I could talk myself out of it. 1 step, 2. And from the stairwell door I heard something soft, like a tiny scrape, then a pause. My stomach dropped. Was he in there? The stairwell door was heavier than it needed to be. It closed behind us with that slow, air-sucking thud that makes you feel like you've crossed into a place you're not supposed to be. The light in there was dim and a little flickery, and halfway down the first flight, that kitten was wedged on a step like he'd run out of bravery mid-move. He wasn't crying. He wasn't calling for anyone. He just stared up at us with those wide, glassy eyes, frozen between going up and going down. I lowered myself into a crouch, trying to make my body smaller. "Hey, buddy," I said, softer than I meant to. The kitten flinched anyway and backed up 1 step, paws slipping a little on the concrete. My neighbor came down 1 step and tried a quiet, careful pss-pss-pss. Nothing. The kitten didn't respond to the sound. He responded to the silence after it. When we stopped trying, when we held still and let the space breathe, he leaned forward a fraction, like he could finally hear his own thoughts. We stood there, 2 strangers in sweatpants and hallway light, negotiating with a creature the size of a sandwich. "Okay," my neighbor whispered, like she was talking to me, but also to herself. "We call the manager tomorrow." "He can't stay here tonight," I said again. I didn't even feel dramatic. It was just obvious. She sighed, looking past the kitten toward the landing. "And we can't leave him in the hall. The concierge will write it up. She writes everything up." "Yeah," I said, and I hated that I knew exactly who she meant. My neighbor's jaw tightened. "So what, you take him?" I blinked at her. "Why me?" "Because you found him. You opened your door too." She shot me a look. "Because I have a dog." "You have a dog?" I said, a little too loud. "It's not mine," she snapped right back. "It's temporary." We both paused, hearing our own voices bounce off the stairwell walls. It was creeping toward 9. Quiet hours. Of course. She glanced down at the kitten. He'd turned his head side to side like he was following our argument the way you follow a tennis match. "Box," she said. "I have a delivery box." "Towel," I said. "Warm towel. I've got one." We weren't even solving the same problem. She was thinking rules. I was thinking warmth. And in that gap, the kitten made his own decision. He stepped down 1 slow stair, then another, and walked right into the space between us. Then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, he folded himself onto the step, stretched his little front legs out, and lay there like a line drawn on the floor. "Don't cross me. Or maybe, don't leave me." My neighbor exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. "Fine. An hour. At your place. Just to get him out of here." I nodded. "An hour. We moved together, slow, and the kitten let me scoop him up. Tense as a coiled spring, but he didn't fight. His body was warm in my hands in a way that made my chest tighten for no good reason. Back in the hallway, I walked to my door, my neighbor close behind like a witness. I unlocked it, pushed the door open, and the kitten jolted so hard he nearly launched out of my arms, scrambling backward, eyes suddenly wild. It wasn't just fear. It was like he recognized something in there, like he'd already been inside, and it had scared him. Why? I didn't force him in. I just stepped across my threshold and stopped, like I was waiting for the apartment to introduce itself. The kitten stayed in my arms, stiff, eyes locked on the darker part of my living room. When I lowered him onto the entryway rug, he didn't bolt. He also didn't explore. He sat right at the edge of the door frame like he needed a clean exit line at all times. My neighbor hovered in my doorway, one hand still on her own knob across the hall, like she could retreat at any second. The way she watched me made me feel like I was on probation. I kept my movements slow. I filled a small bowl with water and set it down a few feet away. I found an old, clean towel from the closet and folded it into a little nest. Then I turned off the overhead light so it wasn't so harsh. The apartment got quieter immediately, like it exhaled. The kitten waited. Then he got up and walked to the bowl in these careful, measured steps. He took 2 quick drinks, 3 maybe, then turned around and went straight back to the door. Not to the towel, not to me, to the door. He sat facing it, ears twitching, like the thing he wanted most wasn't comfort. It was an escape route. My neighbor's voice dropped. He acts like he's been chased. Or like he knows doors, I said, because I didn't know what else to call it. We stood there for a second, watching him be small and brave at the same time. Then, because we were 2 adults who didn't know what to do with the feeling in the room, we turned it into logistics. Food, she said. Litter. If we do anything, it's money. It's not a car, I said quietly. It's a kitten. Exactly, she answered, sharper than she meant to. It turns into a whole life. I looked at the kitten. He didn't look back. He stared at my front door like it might open on its own. We should at least check if someone's looking, I said. Like, in the building. She hesitated, then nodded. And what if someone shows up tomorrow and he's... She stopped herself, swallowing the end of the sentence. I don't want to be the person who keeps someone's pet. I waited, and in the pause she added, almost embarrassed, I had allergies as a kid. Bad ones. I don't even know if that's still true, but... She shrugged. I'm scared to find out. That honesty hit me harder than it should have. I stared at my shoes. I'm scared too, I admitted, but so low I almost didn't hear myself. Not of him, of getting attached and then losing it. Silence again, the kind that feels like a decision. The kitten turned then, just his head, and for the first time he looked at me directly. He walked over, slow, and placed one tiny paw on my bootlace, not tugging, just resting there like he was saying, stay where you are. My neighbor's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen and her face changed. Oh, she whispered. No, they're calling now. She answered, listened, then covered the mic and looked at me. I have to pick up a golden retriever, tonight. Emergency foster. I can't say no. She dropped her hand, spoke fast into the phone, and when she hung up, she was already halfway panicking. Then she looked at the kitten, then at me. Can we do this together? She asked. Just for tonight, until I get back. I said I had a dog, she told me, breathing like she'd been running even though she hadn't moved. I meant I'm supposed to pick him up tonight. He's not here yet. That one sentence made everything click. Why she'd sounded defensive, why she kept glancing at the clock, why the idea of bringing a kitten into her place felt like lighting a match. Match. Okay, I said. Go. I've got him for now. But she didn't leave right away. She looked down at the kitten, still near my door, still positioned like he needed a route out, and then she disappeared into her apartment and came back holding a hard-sided carrier. I bought it when I moved, she said, like she was explaining a weird habit. Just in case. Don't ask. I grabbed the towel I'd folded and a thicker throw blanket from my couch. We stepped into the hallway together, and for a second it felt strange, like we were moving furniture for a life neither of us had agreed to. We set the carrier down between our doors, not inside my place, not inside hers, right on the neutral tile under the hallway light. A tiny, awkward peace treaty. The kitten approached it on his own. He sniffed the edge, rubbed his cheek against the plastic like he was leaving a signature, then backed away and sat in the middle again, his favorite spot. Still deciding, still measuring us. That's when the elevator dinged. The concierge, older, sharp-eyed, always in a blazer like she'd been hired to be disappointed, stepped out with a clipboard in her hand. She stopped the second she saw the carrier and the kitten and us standing there like guilty teenagers. "Animals aren't allowed in the corridor," she said, flat as a rule, "and unregistered pets come with fines." My neighbor opened her mouth, but I spoke first. "He showed up tonight. We're not keeping him in the hall. We're trying to do this right." The concierge's eyes flicked to the kitten. Even she softened a millimeter. Not much, but it was there. "If it belongs to someone in the building," she said, "I can post a notice in the elevator. They'll call the leasing office. That's how we handle lost property." 48 hours, I said out loud, surprising myself with how firm it sounded. "Give us 48 hours to see if someone claims him." The concierge nodded once, like she'd just stamped a form. 48. After that, you'll need to show proof of intake or registration. Understood? Understood, we both said. My neighbor exhaled as the concierge walked away. "She takes rules seriously," she muttered, then glanced at me like she regretted even that much. I shrugged. At least it's clear. We stood there a second longer, and the kitten chose that moment to stand up and press his side against my ankle. Not cuddly. More like anchoring himself. My neighbor checked her phone. "I have to go get the golden," she said. "But," she paused, "we need an actual plan." So we made one. Right there on the tile. I'd post in the building chat and ask around. In the morning, I'd call the leasing office and leave my number in case anyone responded to the notice. She'd look into general shelter intake options if no one came forward. No dramatic promises, just a 48-hour agreement. It sounded like a contract, and that made us both smile, short and awkward. The kitten blinked at us, then walked to her door, sniffed the bottom seam, and came back, like he was checking if we were still here. She left for the dog, and I brought the kitten back inside with the carrier beside him, door open so he wouldn't feel trapped. He watched me from the entryway all night like sleep was something you had to earn. By morning, he was the one who moved first. I cracked the door to grab the mat, and he slipped past my ankle before I even realized it. He padded into the hallway, stepping through a few tiny droplets he'd tracked from the water bowl, and left faint wet prints on the tile as he went. He walked straight to the space between our doors. Then, as if a sound only he could hear snapped the air, he froze. And in one quick motion, he slipped out of the light and vanished down the hall, like someone had spooked him. He was gone so fast it didn't feel real. I walked the hallway twice, then the stairwell, then the little common room by the mailboxes, like maybe he'd decided to become someone else's problem. Nothing. No soft rustle, no blink of blue eyes, just the hum of the building waking up. My neighbor came out a few minutes later, hair pulled back, jacket half-zipped, leash in her hand. The golden retriever stood beside her, calm and big and kind-eyed, like he'd been dropped into our chaos from a different world. "Any sign?" she asked. I shook my head, and I watched her mouth press into a thin line like she was holding something back. Not tears, something sharper, like disappointment in herself for carrying this quickly. We went to the leasing office as soon as it opened. The manager looked tired in that professional way, like every issue in the building had landed on his desk at once. He pulled up the camera feed, rewound it, and we leaned in shoulder to shoulder. We saw the kitten slip down the hall. We saw him pause at the corner. Then the screen showed nothing, a stretch of empty tile. "Blind spot," the manager said, tapping the monitor. "That utility door area. Camera doesn't catch the angle." My neighbor's fingers tightened around the leash. The golden looked up at her, then back down the hall like he understood the assignment. We checked everywhere that made sense. The underground parking garage, rows of cars and cold concrete. The storage units, each door like a sealed secret. We called his soft little PSPS peace, then stopped and listened because silence was the only thing he seemed to trust. By late afternoon, we were outside by the loading dock where the dumpsters sat. The wind smelled like cardboard and exhaust. My neighbor kept her voice steady, but her eyes didn't match it. "I didn't even want a kitten," she said quietly, like it was an accusation. and now I can't breathe. I surprised myself by answering honestly. I'm not scared of losing him, I said. I'm scared of how fast he became ours. The golden tugged once, firm but not frantic, nose low to the ground. He pulled toward the utility door at the side of the building, the one with the chipped paint and the warning sign nobody reads. He stopped there and sniffed the bottom seam, then looked back at us like, This is where the story goes. We couldn't get in, but we could leave something. I took the blanket the kitten had slept against, mostly. He'd barely used it, but his smell was there, faint and real. I rubbed it along the lower edge of the door and left it folded right beside the frame, like a quiet message. That night, we did something that would have sounded ridiculous to me a week earlier. We sat in my car in the garage with the engine off, just listening. No music, no scrolling, just the building settling sound, the occasional distant elevator, the dogs breathing, my own thoughts getting louder. My neighbor stared at the steering wheel like it held answers. I don't want to go back to living like I don't matter to anyone, she said, so softly I almost thought she hadn't meant to say it out loud. My throat tightened. Me neither, I said. The first night passed, then the second day. We checked again. We posted in the building chat. We called the leasing office number and asked if anyone had responded to the notice. Nothing solid, just vague, maybe I saw him messages that led nowhere. By the second night, exhaustion made everything feel unreal. I went back upstairs alone, opened my door, and stood in the entryway for a long moment, staring at the spot where he'd sat like a checkpoint. Then I heard it. A light, careful scratching sound, right from under my door. I didn't fling the door open. I went down to my knees first, like I didn't want the sound to scare him off. Another soft scrape, then a pause. When I finally cracked the door, he was right there at my threshold. Not inside, not running, just sitting close enough that the tip of his tail almost brushed my welcome mat. His fur looked dulled and dusty, and one ear had a dark smudge like he'd been under pipes or behind boxes. He blinked at me once, slow, tired, but steady. My chest did this stupid thing where it hurt and warmed up at the same time. I whispered, "Hey." He didn't bolt. Across the hall, my neighbor's lock clicked. She stepped out fast, then caught herself when she saw him like her body wanted to rush and her brain said, "Don't." The Golden's tags gave one small jingle, and the kitten's head snapped toward the sound. He went rigid for half a second. So we both did the only thing that had ever worked with him. We stopped trying. We sat down on the floor, me by my door, her by hers, leaving space between us like it mattered. I rested my hand on the tile, palm up, not reaching. She pulled a small piece of fabric from her pocket, something soft that smelled like laundry. She set it down closer to her side, like an offering she wasn't embarrassed to make. The kitten watched both of us. Then, without anyone moving toward him, he stood and padded forward, past my welcome mat, past the seam in the tile, until he settled between our two doors again. His spot. His line. He walked to the fabric first. He lowered his face and pressed his nose into it, breathing it in like he was saving the scent somewhere inside him. Then he turned and came toward me. Not all the way, just close enough. He folded down beside my elbow, his body touching my sleeve, light as a question. I froze like if I breathed too hard he'd change his mind. My neighbor's voice came out as a whisper. "Do you see that?" I nodded because I did. "He's connecting us," she said, like the words surprised her. Normally I would have made a joke, something to keep it from getting too real, but I couldn't, not with that small warm weight against my arm. All I could think was, we can pretend this is temporary and lose him again, or we can risk doing this together and actually mean it. The kitten lifted his head and looked past us toward the elevator, ears tilting as if he heard movement before we did. I followed his gaze, and my stomach tightened, because taped inside the elevator was a fresh notice. Big letters, simple words. Lost kitten, Blue Point. Please call leasing office. We stood in front of the elevator like it was a courtroom. The kitten was tucked in the carrier now, not locked in, just safe. His face pressed near the grate so he could watch us. Every few seconds his tail tip flicked like he was counting our breaths. My neighbor read the notice again, even though we'd both already memorized it. Lost kitten, Blue Point. Please call leasing office. She swallowed. We have to call. Yeah, I said, and I meant it. I just didn't like what it might cost. Back in the hallway, we put the carrier down between our doors. She put the Golden in a sit and held the leash close so there wouldn't be sudden noise. Then we dialed the leasing office number on speaker. A woman answered, bright voice, professional. My neighbor started, then stopped, and I jumped in. Hi. We saw the notice. The kitten is with us right now. We just want to make sure we do the right thing. There was a pause, like she was pulling up a note. Okay, the woman said. Thank you for calling. We've had a couple of messages already. My stomach tightened. From who? 2 different people, she said carefully. One caller claimed he was the owner, but he couldn't provide a photo or describe anything specific. Another caller wasn't claiming ownership, just said there was a kitten in the hallway and it needed to be handled. My neighbor's hand clenched around the leash. The Golden stayed still, watching her face. So nobody has proven it's theirs, I said. Not at this time, the woman confirmed. If you're willing to hold the kitten for the remainder of the 48-hour window, that helps. If someone calls with proof, we'll contact you. Otherwise, we'll need documentation that you've started the intake or registration process after the window. I looked at my neighbor. She looked at me. The carrier shifted slightly, and the kitten's eyes met mine through the grate, steady like he was listening. My neighbor exhaled. Okay, she said into the phone, voice shaky but clear. We'll hold him, and if someone can actually prove it, we'll talk. But we're not handing him over to a stranger with a story. Understood, the leasing office woman said, softer now. Thank you. When the call ended, neither of us moved for a second. Then the kitten did. He reached one paw through the carrier grate and tapped the tile, once, twice, like a tiny knock we could finally answer. My neighbor crouched near the carrier, not touching him, just close. He picked us, she whispered. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a cute idea. It felt like a responsibility. Because now the last step wasn't about finding an owner. It was about choosing what we were to him, mine, hers, or ours. The next few days were a blur in the quietest way. We kept expecting the phone to ring with something clear, an actual photo, a detail only a real owner would know. Something that would make the decision simple. It never came. Every time my screen lit up, my stomach jumped, and every time it was nothing. In the meantime, the kitten acted like he was training us. He'd eat a little, then step back and watch. He'd nap, but only where he could see both doors when the hallway light was on. When the Golden walked by, he didn't panic anymore. He'd just lift his head, ears forward, and let the dog pass like a guard he was slowly learning to trust. After a few days, with no one coming forward with proof, the leasing office confirmed what we already felt in our bones. If we were going to keep him safe, we needed to start the official process. So we did what we said we would. We went together, not to give him away, just to do the next right step. At a local pet services center, we kept it simple. Paperwork, a quick check-in, no big speeches. The kitten stayed in his carrier, watching us through the grate like he was making sure neither of us tried to disappear. On the walk back, the Golden moved calmer than he had that first night, like he'd accepted his place in this. Not competition, security. We talked about ordinary things, and it surprised me how much relief there was in that. What do we call him? My neighbor asked. I don't know, I said. Something that fits his attitude. She smiled a little. He has an attitude. We talked about splitting costs without making it weird, about what to tell the concierge, about putting a second mat down because the hallway was starting to feel like a shared front porch. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, it hit me. We weren't talking like neighbors managing a problem. We were talking like people making a home plan. That night, she came over with takeout, and the Golden settled on my rug like he'd been doing it for years. The kitten didn't take the hallway spot anymore. He curled up in my living room on the edge of the mat, warm and small, finally asleep without keeping one eye open. My neighbor sat on my couch, knees tucked under her, and for a minute, neither of us spoke. The quiet didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I looked at that kitten and thought, honestly, the scariest part wasn't bringing him in. It was admitting I wanted to be needed again. The kitten suddenly lifted his head, slow, blinking at both of us like he was taking account, like he was asking a question he couldn't say out loud. Are you really staying?